Did you ever decide to go out for a fly and regard that wide green world below and wonder just how it got that way? Billions of years ago, this happy accident, this blue-green speck of dust we now call Earth, was a dry wasteland. But we were fortunate. At that time, ice was abundant in the solar system, in the form of asteroids. And for millions upon millions of years, they rained down on Earth and melted and became the seas and streams and rivers and oceans that we know today. Hydrogen and oxygen come together to become the stuff called water. And everything that lives and breathes on this little globe depends on it. It would not be an exaggeration to say that life on Earth was born of the tears of the stars. Every man, woman, child, and living creature needs good water. And for countless eons, the delicate balance and harmonies of the forest has kept it pure. But now, all that is in jeopardy.
Saw a trout down there. Definitely gonna have to visit this place again. Every brook, every stream, every tributary is part of Earth's immense cardiovascular. It's really kind of noisy here, isn't it? Let's pause.
There. Now we can continue uninterrupted. I kind of like the music though. Let's get that going again. Here, disturbance to the stream is minimal, and the water flows over stone, through sand, and all through the forest, which purifies it all along the way, so much so that we find abundant trout in this water.
This stream is truly an idyllic setting. There are various trout swimming around in that water, and trout don't live in water that's not pure. There are water skaters swimming over the top of the water. There are various insects flying about, some of which must become food for those trout. There's small wildlife all around here, various birds and squirrels, martins, fishers and such. Coyote pack lives near here. It's a beautiful and idyllic area. A stream like this can support wildlife because it's pure. But what happens when the water becomes impure? What happens, in fact, when human activities introduce toxins into the water? If we take this a step further, what happens if we level a forest, a biodiverse forest like this with many species of trees and plants and fungi, and replant it with a monocrop of trees, conifers in particular? Let's find out.
I imagine that around the time the first caveman figured out how to carve a blade from a piece of stone and attach that blade to a stick, there's been logging in some form or another. For eons, though, our population was low, and we were not able to make a significant impact to the overall ecology of the planet. But over time, our population grew, and by the time we had reached the era of the Roman Empire, in fact, long before then even, logging had become a significant impactor on the global ecology of the planet. As our numbers continued to climb throughout the medieval era and into the 20th century, our technology made us more and more capable of quickly leveling trees. Entire forests were felled. Whole species of plants and animals went extinct. For a long time, though, our ability to fell forests was limited by our technology. For the most part, right up until about the beginning of the 20th century, that technology was largely the horse and the axe. Then came the fossil fuel revolution, and suddenly loggers had access to chainsaws and powerful trucks that could haul out timber in great quantities at a time from the forest. And now, much more capable machines exist. Giant machines capable of clipping enormous trees right at the base of their trunks, felling them over as easily as a person cuts a weed from a garden, and skimming the branches from those trunks, leaving logs behind for trucks to come by and pick up in loads numbering multiple tons to head to various lumber mills. But in the latter half of the 20th century, a new industry began to become predominant among the forestry sector. And as if logging didn't do enough damage to forests, the pulp industry is entirely harmful. The pulp industry essentially converts trees to fibrous pulp, which is then used to make paper and any number of other products. The best trees to use for pulp, though, are conifers. The pulp industry is so hungry for conifers that they raze vast regions of forest to the ground. These are native forests with a wide variety of species. And when the pulp industry is done with those forests, they are not replaced with their native species. Those forests are replaced with conifers. Effectively, and very literally, biodiverse native forests are replaced with monoculture pulp farms. These may look like forests in that they are full of trees, but they have been likened to green deserts. Very little can grow in a pulp plantation apart from conifers. And this is by design. But perhaps we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's step back and take a look at why biodiverse forests are absolutely essential for good water. When it comes to good water, the magic begins here. Nothing else purifies water like an old forest. Indeed, nothing else can, but we'll come back to that later. Forest water purification begins in the canopy, and the canopy of a mature forest is best. The leaves are large and broad and numerous, and in effect, they act like a baffle. Have you ever walked in a mature wood on a day that it's raining? You can stay under those boughs for quite some time before the rain actually works its way through them and reaches you. I've walked entire afternoons while it was storming overhead and hardly gotten a drop on me simply by staying under the boughs of mature trees. For all intents and purposes, the canopy of the forest acts like a speed bump for rainstorms. It slows the fall of water from cloud to ground. This takes velocity away from the water so that it hits the ground with less energy and is less likely to churn up soil. Less churned soil means less erosion. And preventing erosion isn't just a matter of slowing down the flowing away of dirt. That soil contains nutrients, and if much is churned up, those nutrients would flow from the forest down into watercourses. And if too much nutrient were to enter any body of water, it would trigger an overactive growth of algae and bacteria. Water benefits from the presence of a little algae and a little bacteria, but too much would ultimately toxify the water, rendering it unsafe, even deadly. We'll take a look at one such story of a pure lake becoming deadly shortly. But forests, especially mature forests, have well-established buffers to inhibit the flow of nutrient down into watercourses. The rain that lands on great old trees has a long way to travel to get down those trunks. Along the way, it loses some of the pollutants that it may be carrying in the cracks and crevices of the bark. It hits the ground, which is a loamy forest duff, often quite deep, and much of the water is absorbed by that ground, because the duff acts like a sponge and can absorb over 12 inches of rainwater per hour. The weight of water builds in the duff until the water eventually makes its way down to little streamlets. The streamlets slowly make their ways down to tiny streams. From there, the water has exited the watershed. That's the ground that moves water, and it has entered watercourses. The streams work their ways into larger streams, and those larger streams become rivers, and ultimately those larger rivers work their way into lakes and oceans. But once again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, because what the forest does to create good water is far more complicated. Much of the water that enters the duff never makes it into a streamlet at all. This water is carried up through the roots, through the trunk, and ultimately through the branches and out through the leaves and back into the air through a process known as transpiration. During this process, the water moves nutrients it has picked up into the wood and the living tissue of the tree. It also serves to absorb environmental pollutants. In fact, a single mature sugar maple can absorb per year up to 60 milligrams of cadmium, 140 milligrams of chromium, 820 milligrams of nickel, and 5,200 milligrams of lead. This is an enormous benefit on cleansing the environment, and mature trees do this year after year of their long lives. Immature trees do this also, but not nearly so well and not nearly so efficiently. The environmental cleansing capacity of an acre of mature forest is worth many times that of an immature forest. And because a mature forest is host to so many species of plants and fungi, not to mention the microflora and microfauna, as well as a great many species of grown trees, a mature forest can absorb a wide variety of pollutants. And as those pollutants work their way through growing herbs and fungi, they are chemically broken down and neutralized. By contrast, a pulp plantation has a very limited range of species and thus a very limited range of ability to store various pollutants. Not only that, but because the pulp plantation trees are typically not allowed to grow to be very old, a pulp plantation can never store pollutants as efficiently. And since pulp plantations and any kind of replanted forests are grown upon profoundly disturbed ground, they can never serve as well in the role of impeding the flow of water and stopping erosion. To make matters worse, due to widespread clear-cutting for all kinds of purposes, much of the forest has been decimated. That forest simply is no longer there to provide any kind of protection against erosion, against the movement of nutrient from ground into water, nor to absorb pollutants of any kind. Earth has other systems to absorb pollution and deal with erosion, but when it comes to ensuring good water, healthy mature forests are the most important. I've come to the county of Pictou, where we find the industrious little town of New Glasgow and the nearby historic and scenic village of Pictou, to meet with Joanne Baxter, who authored the book The Mill, documenting 50 years of corruption that have led to the poisoning of the local water supply, as well as the indifferent destruction of countless tens of thousands of acres of the very woods that would have protected it. The village of Pictou was one of the first places to ever be settled in North America, and it has a proud maritime history. Today, its economy is largely dependent on tourism and fishing, but pressure from logging and the pulp industry now threaten to destroy both its scenic value and its all-important water quality. And we're standing in front of the Hector historic ship that brought early settlers over to the Pictou area, and right behind me is the Northern Pulp Mill, which is a key player in maritime forestry and a key player in the development of the pulp sector and a key player in deforestation that goes on the east side of this country, which means indirectly it's also a key player to the reduction of water quality in the area.
I think for people in other parts of the world, they'd be surprised at how much Canadians in general and Nova Scotians in particular take water for granted. It's a resource that people see as always being there. It's free. I grew up in a city in Nova Scotia, and I didn't even know where my water came from. For me, it came out of a tap. It was always there. There were never shortages. I lived and worked in Africa for more than 30 years, and I saw Canadian development experts over there lecturing people in Africa about not cutting down trees because it would affect their water supply. And they even did huge diagrams of what happens to the water table when trees are taken off the surface.
Joan is referencing her experiences in Africa, but deforestation, resulting erosion, and destruction of water quality are phenomena seen all around the globe. In North America, we often make the mistake of thinking that deforestation and water quality issues are problems of third world countries. But nature and the way it works doesn't care where we live or what our economy is. The principles and rules that govern it are always the same. In this paper on Haiti's devastating erosion and forest quality issues, we see the problems began with intensive monocropping. A bit later came widespread harvest of timber for export markets. And then, a growing urban population, hungry for energy, began using the forest as a source of biofuel. Does this sound familiar? It almost exactly mirrors our present course.
The only rules governing cutting of woods have to do with the habitat. And that means for every 9 hectares you cut, you have to leave 30 representative trees. So as one forester said to me, we've become a province of clear cuts and clumps of buffers. And the buffer that you have to leave on a waterway is if a stream is more than 50 centimeters in diameter, then you have to leave a 20-meter buffer. Well, I have seen cases myself where no buffer was left at all. Who's monitoring that? And is 20 meters really enough buffer?
Sadly, I have seen what Joan is describing many times myself, from the air and on the ground. In this aerial video, we see the clear cutting of an old deciduous forest, and we see in the upper left quadrant that no space has been left between the forest and the stream. In another clear cut, loggers have cut within 3 meters of a major watercourse. And here we see loggers have clear cut directly over a streamlet measuring 50 centimeters across. I'm standing at the edge of the forest, and the streamlet begins at a spring in the clear cut where it's brighter at the edge of the woods. And here is another clear cut beside a major stream where no buffer has been left at all. If there is no buffer, the forest cannot do its job and hold topsoil in place. Nutrient will leach into the stream, algae and bacteria will grow, and this will lead to algal blooms and other means by which the water will be toxified. The truth is that over the years I have looked at hundreds of clear cuts, and I find violations in almost every single one of them. It's time to travel again, and our next destination takes us along coastal routes, past scenic and historic villages, to a lovely out-of-the-way spot that was once a paradise called Mattatall Lake. Mattatall is one of countless thousands of lakes all around North America that has suffered gross degradation of its water quality in the last 7 decades. And yet, at a casual glance, everything would seem to be just fine. On this summer's day, the sky and lake are blue, surrounded by a sea of protective forest that would seem to go on forever. But appearances are deceptive, for beginning a few years after the start of clear cuts in the region, the water began to turn this sickly green, indicating that something was terribly wrong.
And if you look at the really important watersheds in Nova Scotia, the Cobequid Mountains, there are 7 watersheds coming out of those mountains. They're being clear cut at a great rate at this moment. Plus the government is promoting gold mining and gold exploration up there. And that is also a really water intensive industry. So I'm not sure where the people think the water is going to come from in the future.
Clearing the forest away for timber has thrown the ecology of this lake and its surrounding area into chaos. It began years ago when the timber industry began clearing forest around the lake. Soon the pulp industry had moved in, and clear cutting was in full swing. In this series of skewed satellite images, some taken during the summer, some during the winter, pale areas indicate clear cutting that has gone on around the lake up until 2017. With so much forest gone, the land was open to erosion, and since the lake sits literally at the bottom of a shallow geographical bowl, there was no place for that erosion to flow other than into its watershed. The result, the bacterial growth and algal blooms, were inevitable. The bacteria, Anabaena planktonica, produced a potent neurotoxin called anatoxin A, rendering the lake water dangerous for larger microorganisms such as fish, and unsafe to drink or even swim in. When called upon to help, government proved itself uninterested in either investigating or treating the situation, essentially telling the residents they could deal with it themselves. The folk of nearby Tatamagouche learned what this meant. Government, their government, would always take the side of big industry. And now, with government promoting the development of strip mines in the area, they're afraid for their good water. And if one visits the nearby village of Tatamagouche, signs of the fear and concern of the residents is everywhere. The paradise that was once Tatamagouche now feels like a region under siege. Dr. Peter Sorensen is an expert in lake ecology with the University of Minnesota. In his TED Talk, Saving Our Lakes and Fisheries, Creating Freshwater Conservation Areas, published on August 3, 2017, Dr. Sorensen discusses the challenges facing our freshwater lakes and the near impossibility of restoring them to their pristine state. Dr. Sorensen clearly points out that when pollutants enter a lake ecosystem, they tend to settle to the bottom, and it can take decades, even centuries, for those pollutants to be worked out. The lake's ecosystem is very likely never to be the same. We can help a body of fresh water heal, but we cannot remake its ecosystem. Once it's gone for good, and its capacity to purify water is thereby damaged to some degree permanently. Ecosystems are complicated, far beyond the capacity of our best science to restore them. And what this says, more than anything else, is we need to take care of what we have. And now, once again, it's time to travel. I've come to Colchester County, to the small town of Truro, to meet with MLA Lenore Zann, who is also the NDP environmental critic. We've arranged to meet at the Holywell Gazebo deep in Truro's Victoria Park, and I have to say, coming here is always a pleasure. Lenore is known for being an outspoken voice for responsible resource management and conservation. And I wanted to hear what her constituents have told her about their concerns regarding threats to their good water.
You know, all of that. But a lot of people are concerned about water right now, not just in my area, but across the province, and with good reason. When I first became the MLA here for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, and Salmon River, we had a big flood in 2010, I believe it was. And when I started to look into the reasons why it became such a huge flood, part of the reason was because a lot of clear cutting had gone on higher ground. So in Salmon River, for instance, there were a lot of new homes that had been built and developed, and they had clear cut a lot of the forest that had been up high. And so there were no roots to hold on to the trees. They hadn't really considered the fact that we need green spaces and trees in sporadic areas around the homes. And so the river, when the river rose, we were flooded from the river flooding. We were flooded from the rain dropping in enormous amounts and saturating the ground, and there was no more room for more water. But also on high, the water was coming down from the hills and meeting in the middle. So it was a huge problem, and that was one of the first things that I noticed and learned about that made me very much aware of the impact that clear cuts.
Lenore is referencing two things here. One is the ability of a mature forest to act as a baffle for flowing water. An old forest is full of detritus, stout standing trees, logs, shrubs, boulders, and other debris that impede the flow of water. Also, an old forest contains at its base a deep layer of loam. The ability of a forest to act as a baffle will slow down the flow of rainwater from high ground, and it will also serve to disperse it. However, it's that deep loam that is especially useful when dealing with floodwaters. Remember that little demonstration in which I poured nearly a liter of water directly into heavy forest loam? That loam acted like a sponge and soaked it up nearly instantly. When there is a major storm that brings enough rain to create floodwaters, forest loam soaks up a great deal of that water. Some of that water will safely evaporate back into the air, purified by the way, so that the next time the rain falls it's much cleaner, and of the water that stays in the loam, much of it will feed the trees and surrounding foliage, and the rest of it will slowly work its way down the watershed into streams and lakes. A good forest loam slows the progress of the water so that it doesn't have much chance to build up force and depth necessary to become floodwaters. But on high ground, such as here, where the forest has been clear-cut, there is very little left to impede the flow of water, and while there is leftover forest loam in the soil, without the trees to continually feed that loam through falling leaves and falling logs that rot, the loam will become shallower and poorer. As it degrades, the rain will flow off it like water over hard-packed soil. Such ground does very little to impede floodwaters.
It's shocking to me that this is still going on in this day and age, and that in a province as beautiful and pristine as Nova Scotia, where this is one of our greatest resources, is the beauty and integrity of our natural, not resources, but our nature, that we are not trying to protect it more. You know, in New Zealand, for instance, they have made rivers like people. They have rights. And that's because the Maori people of New Zealand, many of them are actually in the government now. And so when you have a people who are respected and their belief system is respected and they respect Mother Earth and want to protect Mother Earth, that's when you have some progress.
Can you imagine such a thing? A world where nature, where rivers are given the right to exist. And yet, it would only seem to make sense. This earth is truly our mother. She is where we come from. We are bound to her. There is no other planet B. There's no place else to go if we do not take care of this world. And taking care of this world means ensuring that we have good water. And ensuring that we have good water means ensuring that we have good forests. As I ponder this reality, I walk through the beautiful ancient forests of Victoria Park. Around me are a myriad of wildlife, and people pass by on the trails now and then, living in harmony with them. It is possible, I believe, for people and nature to coexist harmoniously, but we'd have to change the way we look at the world a great deal.
Water is sacred. I think in this day and age with global warming and climate change, we are going to find that one of the most valuable natural resources anywhere can have is their water.